I have the pleasure of introducing for a brief lecturette a Seattle resident, an educator, author, and civic entrepreneur, Eric Liu. In addition to being a speechwriter, he also served as Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor for President Clinton. He's currently a fellow at the Center for Social Cohesion at Arizona State University and teaches at the University of Washington. He is also an author and co-author. Accidental Asian is one of his most widely read books. Also, he was co-author of The True Patriot. And the new book, which you're going to be hearing some ideas from today, is Gardens of Democracy, which very much links with the theme of our conference about building civic infrastructure. So please, a very warm welcome for Eric Liu.
Thank you so much, John, for that introduction. And what I want to speak today about is both the opportunity that we face and a challenge that we face. And the opportunity, I think, is all around us in very palpable ways. The fact that this organization itself and this network has just been growing by leaps and bounds and in intensity and richness. And there really is this incredible ecosystem, this living, vibrant, very diversified ecosystem of activity and thought and practice and purpose coming together. And I know Sandy alluded to, called it cat herding, and that's true, but that's a sign of a very vibrant ecosystem, that that it is not a monoculture. That it is not one form only of being or existence or expression, right? And the opportunity that we face right now is tremendous. I think I look around in the country and for all the ways in which our politics and our democracy is broken or wounded or deficient and defective right now, there is, I think, across the board, across the political spectrum, across the geography of the United States, there is a nascent, even more than nascent, hunger and yearning for folks to reclaim the very idea of citizenship again and what it means to be a citizen. And recognizing, here we gather here today, the day after the vice presidential debate and a week or so after the first presidential debate. And those moments, as entertaining as they are real reminders of how over the course of decades in this mass democracy, so many of us have been reduced to spectators. And that spectatorship has really replaced the very idea of citizenship. And I think while that has become the dominant mode for so many of our fellow Americans and for those of us from other countries, just our fellow participants in democracy, while that is the dominant mode, at the same time, because that's become the dominant mode, there is this yearning, this undercurrent for something else, for a way to connect, for a way to express, for a way to be heard and recognized, not merely as spectators. And so I think it's a tremendous opportunity right now for you to be naming this, for you to be connecting people into new forms of practice, for you to be building the kind of civic infrastructure that Sandy has described and that I think all of you over the course of the next 2-3 days are going to give full dimension to. It's an incredible opportunity. And even the parts of the last couple of years, I don't care what your politics are, if you think about the roiling kinds of often unconstructive engagement that happened at those healthcare town halls that we saw alluded to a moment ago. If you think about the emergence of both the Tea Party and, not more than a year ago, the Occupy movement, and the ways in which there were just primal screams of a desire to be heard. Put your politics aside. Put your views about the content aside for a moment and recognize that there is this desire in this country right now for people to be something other than spectators and to take ownership again of the republic. And so that is, to me, the opportunity that we have before us, and it makes this other than just another biennial gathering where people kind of exchange professional tools and tricks of the trade. We're at a moment right now. We're at a moment where either this democracy is going to live up to its promise or it's not. And it will, to the extent that we as a network do our work with purpose and passion. But this brings me to the second thing that I wanted to talk about a moment here, which is the challenge before us, and the challenge before you in particular in the way that you're thinking about the work that you're doing. Because one thing that we are reminded of day in, day out, certainly during a presidential campaign, is, well, number one, most Americans and most people in democracies are not actively front of mind thinking about how they participate in the democracy. But number two, even for those who are, most of them are not thinking that they want to participate through D&D. For most people, certainly in the United States here, participation such as it is comes more through the channel of what I would call B and G, which is blood and guts. Blood and guts. It's not simply that people are out of practice and have let atrophy the muscles of dialogue and deliberation, which we all want in our work to kind of retone up and build back up those muscles, right? It's not just that. It's that for most people, for most humans, the primary avenue of entry into anything civic or political is here. It's right here. And one of the things that I think is a challenge for us as a movement, and I consider us all part of this burgeoning movement of revitalizing and reinvigorating citizenship, is how to make sure that for all the work and the talk that we will do and foster that is necessary and vital, that is rational, that is civil, and that is driven by the mind, that we learn to capture and channel what's going on here. By chance, actually, this evening I'm going to be going to the Seattle premiere of a musical that hit Broadway a couple years ago called Bloody, Bloody Andrew Jackson. Some of you may have heard of this. It's this great kind of using emo kind of heavy metal music and kind of actors in kind of contemporary teenage garb to reenact the rise of Andrew Jackson. Right? And for those of us who are students of history, Andrew Jackson and his rise was a rise of angry, everyday people feeling contained and frustrated by elites, feeling voiceless, feeling full of blood and guts and anger, and converting that anger into some ways that we today, in a more sanitized fashion, celebrate: the creation of the Democratic Party, a more populist form of participation in presidential and other politics, but in other ways which we've kind of forgotten about, which was about hate, which is about violence against Native Americans, which was about defining one's role and place in civic life by making sure you defined other people out of it, right? And this is, in fact, how most humans are. Humans are primal, humans are tribal, in the most basic sense. And what we've got to figure out is how to channel that native human energy into the forms that we are creating for dialogue and deliberation. And I don't think it's impossible. I think it's actually quite possible and quite vital and necessary to capture that kind of energy into the forms and the formats that we're creating through dialogue and deliberation. In many ways, as you all begin to discuss the full dimension and meaning of civic infrastructure, I would just put forth to you this simple idea that what we've got to pay attention to is infrastructure of the heart. What are people scared of? What are people scared of? Yes, to some extent, what are people hopeful for? But as time passes, you realize that the dominant note in most of the way that most people, most of the time, engage in civic life is driven more by fear than by hope. Fear for themselves, fear for their place in the world, fear about what standing they have, fear about the future. And we've got to be able to reckon with that fear and reckon with the ways in which that fear consciously and unconsciously drives people to tell certain stories about themselves, about their communities, and about who they deem as other. Until we reckon with that infrastructure of the heart, no amount of civil, rational practice of getting people across different lines to talk to one another is going to really sink in deep in the way that we want to. We want this movement to be something that becomes absolutely viral and absolutely contagious in this country. And I think it can be if we attend to that infrastructure of the heart. So I want to just leave you and close with this simple thought here. In my most recent book, The Gardens of Democracy, one of the chapters is about the nature of citizenship and about the story that we tell about citizenship. And in American, and I think Western life generally, the prevailing story, but particularly in America, where we have this tradition of rugged individualism, the prevailing story of citizenship basically is, as long as I'm not actively harming somebody else, I should be able to do whatever the heck I want. Don't tread on me, right? And what all of us know and recognize, and what all of the technology of our times and the science of our times, what all of the spiritual practice of our age, what all of the ancient wisdom of old traditions reminds us of, is that we are completely bound together, that our fates are entwined, that there is no way to cabin off your pain from my pleasure, your fate from mine. And that the right way to think about it is not, I should be able to do whatever the heck I want so long as I'm not actively harming someone else, but rather to recognize that in this complex, intertwined, interconnected age, that society becomes how you behave. So that if you choose to be civil, things get a little more civil. If you choose to be and to model courtesy, things get a little more courteous. If you choose to engage at the level of the heart and to listen to people and their pain and their fears, then the culture of participation in this country will itself tip and change in those ways as well. This is a room full of incredible supercarriers, nodes of networks, catalysts, carriers of an incredible potential. And I just urge you, my role here today is not to profess, but just to raise questions and to open up this challenge. And I urge and invite you, as you now engage each other in dialogue and deliberation over the next couple of 3 days, to ask yourself, how will you behave so that society becomes that way? How will you feel and learn to feel so that society learns to feel that way? How will you see and learn to see so that society will learn to see that way? And how will we together change the way that we think of the word, we? Good luck, engage each other, and have a great time here. Thank you very much.